Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine and I'm joined now by Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hello, Joe Devine.
We had fun today because we were joined by Gregg Evans, the Athletic's Aston Villa correspondent. With Gregg, we talked about what, Seb?
Pretty much everything. Gregg was great. We did a little bit of an autopsy on the season. We talked about Christian Purslow, Douglas Luiz, Jack Grealish, the change in sporting director. Actually, we even talked about the differences between a sporting and technical director, which is very interesting.
We did do that, didn't we?
Yeah, and we also talked about Dean
the
Smith.
sleeping giant thing.
Yeah, that was very interesting too. No, it was. I enjoyed this one. It was an excellent little episode that rattles along.
Lots to dig your teeth into, and I would say also I'm enjoying covering some of the clubs who are currently in the lower half of the Premier League, because I find that there are a lot of themes that cross between clubs. So I would say, I mean, I'm not just trying to get everyone to listen, but I would say if you've started listening to this not as an Aston Villa fan, do continue, because it's not just for fans of the club, and we work quite hard to ensure that it's of interest to a broad range of people. I hope you will agree. And do you know who else works quite hard to hope that their product is of interest to a broad range of people, Seb?
Is it The Athletic, Joe?
It is The Athletic. And did you know there's a 30-day free trial? You can go to theathletic.com/Tifo to sign up for your 30-day free trial, read to your heart's content. And Seb, there's a few interesting things that these listeners might want to read.
Yeah, I started my day reading Chris Woff's interview with Amanda Staveley, obviously front and centre of the Newcastle takeover story. Fascinating, because I don't think I've ever read anything substantial about Staveley, and Chris did a really fine job. George Corkin is also, covering the story, and George Corkin is George Corkin. We know this. Brilliant writer. And Matt Slater's obviously been along for the ride too, giving analysis on the different states of the takeover, and it's been fascinating. A really good job by The Athletic.
Yeah, they're all genuinely very good. So do visit theathletic.com/Tifo. You can sign up for that 30-day free trial and enjoy yourself in the summer heat. Stay inside, close the curtains, turn the lights off. Don't be near the sun. It's dangerous in the sun. Yeah, it's horrible in the sun.
Well,
it's very hot today.
Yeah,
I think I've gone. I think my brain
close
has melted.
to the sun is
a little
quite
bit.
dangerous. In the sun is also very dangerous. Yes.
It's north of 30 degrees Celsius in London today, gang. I'm sort of very quickly becoming just a puddle of sludge on the floor. And we'll end with that. So thanks for downloading today's episode. We will now leave you in the warm hands and the cool embrace of Gregg Evans. Okay, sporting director Jesus Garcia Petach, or Suso, as everyone seems to know him as, left the club last week and will play no real part in the rebuild. So, Gregg, was this a decision purely based on the recruiting? Because there's a consensus that his relationship with the CEO, Christian Purslow, was difficult. Is that true?
Yeah, so the relationship between the two of them soured in the second half of the season. The noises coming out of Villa was that Suso's position was going to be under review at the end of the season regardless. I mean, what we have to remember is Villa struggled for a large part of the season, didn't they? And they hired 12, 13 new players, and the majority of them were really struggling to perform in the Premier League. So it feels like it was around about February, March time where recruitment started to become a real hot topic, and it was... The feeling was that, well, if Villa had recruited better, then they'd have been performing better this season, and the pressure was almost switching from Dean Smith more onto Suso. And yeah, that carried on really up until the final days of the season, and then Villa somehow got over the line and survived, and then within a day Suso had gone. He decided that he couldn't work no longer at the club, and that he would be moving on to doing another thing, and obviously Villa have moved to replace him already.
Gregg, was there a particular deal, do you think, which soured his relationship with the club specifically?
No, I don't think so. I think it'd be hard to pinpoint it to one deal, just because Villa were so active in the transfer market during his time at the club. I think if you look at some of the deals that he was largely in charge of, it was more of the players coming from foreign countries. Villa recruited heavily from Belgium. they obviously bought their record signing Wesley from Belgium for 22 million. He'd scored 5 goals in 21 games, but was coming under a little bit of criticism from supporters. Hadn't really settled into the Premier League. That was maybe one of the signings that wasn't quite working. Trezeguet was a winger who, in and out throughout the season, again coming under criticism. But to be fair to him, scored some really important goals at the end of the season. And then there were others, Lovro Kalinic was the goalkeeper he's Suso's first signing at the club, and he was signed for £7 million and hardly featured. And he kind of felt like it was going that way. But I think in his defence, Villa had to rebuild so many times when they failed to get promoted in 2018. The whole landscape changed and they had to rebuild the squad again. And then when they got up to the Premier League, they had 7 or 8 players who were old and out of contract that they had to move on, and then they had to go and recruit again. So I think if you speak to any technical director or any scout or any manager, and I've spoken to many over the last couple of years certainly, then they will tell you if you sign 12 players in one transfer window, if you can get 7 or 8 of those to perform, you've done really, really well. Now, without actually going through the whole group, I'd say Villa probably had 5 or 6 that were performing well, and maybe that just isn't quite enough.
So, talking of technical directors, Suso's successor has been announced. What do we actually know about Johan Lange?
Yeah, well, it was quite a surprise, really. It was a bit of a left field.
It was quick, wasn't it? It was really quick.
Yeah. I mean, the messages I was getting was that Villa were going to act quick. They were going to appoint somebody, but I mean, I didn't expect it to be this quick. I thought that they'd take the time, assess their options, and then maybe in a week or 2 or even longer they'd appoint somebody. But look, Johan Lange is the man that's come in. He's 40 years old. He'll be known at Villa as the sporting director rather than the technical director. I mean, I know it's very minor, but that's what he was at Copenhagen. So
what are those differences, Gregg, even if they are minor?
Yeah, so I mean, look, his role at Villa will be getting the best out of the academy, overseeing the scouting and recruitment department, but helping to sort of further enhance like the culture at the club and maybe working a bit closer with Dean Smith on a brand of football that's attractive on the eye, whereas the technical director, you don't focus so much on like the playing style of things. So that's maybe the slight difference, but it's very minor. I think it's just more a term. But anyway, going back to his time at Copenhagen, he was there for 6 years. Worked under Ståle Solbakken, who's the coach, the long-serving coach there, and was actually also his assistant at Wolves, so he's known in the Midlands. And I did a little bit of work in my previous job covering Solbakken's period at Wolves, which was I can't think of a word to describe it, but very not great.
I can,
not
I
great
can, but I don't think I'm going to use that word on the podcast.
But yeah, I mean, I can't say I can remember much of him at Wolves, and I certainly didn't deal with him then. And as I say, a guy who's come over, and the majority of Aston Villa fans won't know too much about him. I mean, the things that appeal to Villa about him are that he's managed to recruit players, or at least assist in the recruitment of players who are very young and have come into the first team at Copenhagen and then been sold on for a profit. Now, that's not necessarily the way that Villa are trying to operate, but they're certainly looking to do that in the academy. They're sourcing the best 15, 16, 17-year-olds across the world at the moment. They're really making a big push. And I feel that the new sporting director will have a big part to play in that. It'll be interesting to see what he can do with a bigger budget, because at Copenhagen they always had to think a little bit different. They had to think a bit outside the box. They were a big major force in the Danish league, but to regularly compete in the Champions League, and I think they have done out of 13 of the last 14 seasons, they had to think differently. So they were going into sort of different markets, your Slovakias and areas like that, and signing players and then moving them on for a profit. I suppose Robert Skov is probably the best example. The Danish forward who moved to Hoffenheim for 9.5 million, and Dennis Vivaro also moved to Lazio for a similar fee. So I think that's what Villa have noticed, that he's been able to get players in and move them on for a profit. So let's hope he can do the same at Villa.
You mentioned earlier about sort of the transience that was created last summer out of necessity because they had so many gaps to fill. What do you expect it to be like this time round? Because do you think they'll be sort of reticent of encouraging the same kind of scenario, or do you think there'll be some major surgery?
Yeah, I think that Villa are in quite a strong position now because they signed a lot of players that were 26 years old or under. Those players have now had a full season in the Premier League, so the majority of them now have got that experience behind them. They've got some of them have increased in value. So if they did want to move on, the ones who they feel are not performing as well as they should have, Villa will probably get the same amount or more back for them. And I think they're just in a strong position because they can critically analyse the squad now and look at it and think, okay, there's probably 2 or 3 areas where we underperform this season. So those are the areas where we're going to go big in the next transfer window. We're going to look at 15 to 25 million pound players and recruit those. And I feel if Villa can do that, if they get maybe 1 or 2 new strikers in, a winger, then they can really kick on next season because the platform is actually already there. I feel like they have got quite a solid base already, and the key is just recruiting right, because if you go and spend £100 million on 4 players, they have to perform for you. You can't be in the same situation where Villa are getting towards the latter stages of the season next season and thinking the players that we've signed haven't quite done it for us yet.
Well, in that regard, then let's talk about Christian Purslow's role, because he's a contrasting character. He was the Liverpool managing director who voted in favour of selling to Hicks and Gillette, but also the head of global commercial activities at Chelsea, to plenty of acclaim. In your opinion, Greg, what has been his effect on Villa so far?
I think broadly speaking, he's done well at Villa because you can't really knock the guy too much when he's come in and it was his decision to sack Steve Bruce. That was controversial at the time amongst some quarters. The fans had certainly turned on Steve Bruce, and Christian Purslow's thought was, this Villa Park crowd want this manager out, so I need to make a change. It was then his decision to bring in Dean Smith, and since then Villa have won promotion and stayed up in the Premier League. So under his watch, they're going quite well. He's obviously, you mentioned the Liverpool thing there. He's obviously hired and fired managers before. It was Benitez, of course. Yeah, it was Rafa Benitez who he got rid of and recruited Roy Hodgson. And then at Chelsea, his work was a little bit different. It was behind the scenes. He secured some really impressive sponsorship contracts at Chelsea, worth well over the £1 billion mark. And that's the aim that's what he's trying to do at Villa now. The aim at Villa is to close the gap on the big 6 in the division by increasing revenue streams year on year, and then developing as a club. Now, to some outsiders, that might sound like a little bit of an ambitious, a not realistic aim, but it's an ambitious aim, yeah, but it is realistic because Villa are a very big club. I hate this word, but they are a sleeping giant. And if they can get it right, then the future could be very successful. So I just think that he's done a decent job. He's worked hard to. One of the first things he did when he came into the club was identify that the women's section needed to improve, the women's team, and they won promotion this year. And he's also looking at improving the academy as well. So there's a lot of hard work that he puts in behind the scenes, and maybe sometimes doesn't always get the praise that he deserves.
Can I ask a question? I mean, I don't know if we can really answer this, because obviously this is about what one person's ambitions. But am I wrong to think about these backroom staff roles in the same way that I would think about footballers? So, for example, we're talking of Christian Purslow, who's worked at Liverpool before, he's worked at Chelsea before. If he were a footballer and he moved to Villa, I would see that as a step down, right? Purely because Villa are at the other end of the league compared to these 2 other clubs we've mentioned. Is that the right way of looking at it with these sort of CEO roles, or in some cases the sporting director roles, or do I need to turn it on its head, Greg? What do you think?
No, I think generally speaking, it's the right way to look at it. I think you would rarely, if you're a CEO of, say, I don't know, Liverpool, as we're speaking about, you would rarely drop down unless you've underperformed in your job. But the difference with Christian Purslow at Aston Villa is that he's also a minority investor, so he's actually got an even bigger role than just simply the CEO. And it was a question that I asked him when he very first moved to the club. I said, basically what you just said to me: Liverpool, Chelsea, Aston Villa.
Right.
Doesn't
What are you doing
kinda
here?
make up. Yeah. What are you actually doing here? They're in Championship, of course, at the time as well. And he said, well, I wouldn't have come to this club purely as CEO. And I thought, right, okay, fair enough. And he revealed at the point then that he had a minority investment in the club. So
Right.
obviously Villa's success is felt even greater by him, because if they're successful, he's making money on it as well.
Well, in that case, that brings me on to talk about ownership too. So in Wes Edens and Nassef Sawiris, we have a collective wealth of around $7.5 billion. What are their long-term plans for the club, do you think? And how will that wealth insulate Villa from the challenges facing football in the post-pandemic world as well?
Yeah, sure, 7.5 billion. Wow, it's an incredible figure, isn't it?
It's a lot of money.
Incredible.
It's bigger than my salary. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, mine too over my lifetime. Times about a million.
I wonder how far back you'd have to go in the generations of our ancestors, just within our family
wow.
unit, before you got to probably never. Anyway, there you go. Some people have got it. What are they going to do with it, Gregg?
Yeah, that's the key. That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, the message I consistently hear from management staff at Villa is that the club are in incredibly safe hands. I was asking the question just before the final few games of the season, what happens if Villa get relegated? Because at that point it was a serious concern. And Dean Smith's reply simply was that the club are in safe hands. There's no need to worry about the short-term future of the club, because our owners are ambitious. They're very, very wealthy, 2 billionaires. And they'll see us through. But I think now Villa fans should not just fear for the future because of the financial crisis that's gripping the world at the moment and may continue to get even worse in the future. But I actually think that Villa fans should be very excited, because these two co-owners want to invest in the club. They want to push the club into the higher echelons of the Premier League, and they're prepared to spend the money. So if you're a fan, I think that's great to hear and something you can get really excited about.
Greg, what's the relationship like between Edens and Sawiris? They seem like quite an unlikely pairing. So do you have any insight on kind of their working relationship day to day with reference to Villa?
Look, they're two very, very extremely successful businessmen, so those are the things that they've got in common more than anything. Wes Edens spends the majority of his time in America. Nassef Sawiris has a base in London, and he also stretches across other areas of the country, of the world. But I feel like Nassef is more of the hands-on type of owner. I think he deals with the football side of things more often. The two of them are obviously still very, very engaged. They're in daily conversations with Christian Purslow, who's the man who effectively runs the club, and both of them were sending Dean Smith individual personalised messages before the final few games of the season, just asking him to pass on their message to the players, which I thought was a nice touch, because they can't get over here at the moment. But yeah, the two of them as a pair, they're quite private. I haven't had many dealings with them, so still learning about them all the time.
Can I ask you directly about the sleeping giant thing, right? Because I get why you sort of cringe at saying it, and I feel
So
like
cringy.
there are a number of clubs in this position, and even as far down the leagues as Sunderland, let's say, you still feel sleeping giant to a certain extent. We can understand why it might make someone cringe, but at the same time, there is value in that type of synopsis, right? Because I remember we did.
Yeah.
In fact, we talked about this last week. We had Andy Jones on to talk about Burnley. Can't remember what magazine it was, the Burnley Express or something. Newspaper took a quote from one of our podcasts that we recorded about a year ago with a group of guys called Brand Finance, talking about how football clubs can be successfully commercially branded. Burnley came up in the conversation, and the idea of Burnley being kind of plucky underdogs is something that these people think actually adds to the brand and makes them more saleable. Right? In Villa's case, you have that immediately with the sort of sleeping giant thing. You have a huge fan base. You have a history of success. If the ownership can get it right, all of that stuff stands the club in good stead in a way that a club which hasn't been traditionally as successful wouldn't be the necessary beneficiaries of. So do you think that's true?
I do, yeah. Just thinking about Villa, I mean, look, I've grown up in the area, so I knew what it was like in the early days, the early 90s, when Villa were a huge club and when they were, genuinely challenging for Premier League titles. They were always in the thick of the cup competitions, winning it in 1994, the League Cup, winning it in 1996, got to the FA Cup final in 2000. Obviously in the first Premier League season, they were the runners up. And then, you stretch further back again, it becomes a little bit more cringy because you get the modern football fans saying, "Oh, you won the European Cup, we'll never know that, will you? Because you always go on about it." And then you get but this is a club that has won the European Cup in 1982, and it's there aren't many clubs in the country that can say that. So they've always got that. They've always got that history, that tradition behind them.
Hey Alex, did you know that this podcast is brought to you by Manscaped, the expert in men's below-the-belt grooming?
I'll be honest, no, not until you just hit me with that.
Seb, did you know that Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family duels?
Precision is important in that area.
It very much is. It very much is. And I'm excited today, gang, because Manscaped has just launched in the UK. We've gone years without using the right tools for the job over here. So you could be one of the first men in the country to experience Manscaped's life-changing products. And that's life-changing in a good way, gang. Their third-generation trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce manscaping accidents, and the water-resistant technology also allows you to groom whilst in the shower. I'm a multitasker, so I like to do everything at once. And we've got a special offer right now for all of you listening to this podcast. Get 20% off and free shipping right now by using the code EPL20, that's EPL20, at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com by using the code EPL20. Happy shaving, gang.
But I think just going back to more current times, if you look at the fan base, I mean, it's huge. They had to cap season tickets this season at 30,000. They had a waiting list of another 10,000. And the reason they capped that, the reason they wanted to have a certain amount of tickets available is so that they can continue to grow the club, so that they can get new supporters through the door. And that's what they were finding this season. I remember writing a story for The Athletic, actually. It was the Aston Villa versus Liverpool game. And the theme that I took on the story was that this is the hottest game in the country right now. You cannot get a ticket for this game. And just before... And the reason I knew that was because there were friends of mine that were asking me to get tickets, and they quite regularly do, and I can't always sort them out.
Yeah.
It becomes one of these things. I had to put a WhatsApp status on once saying before the final, I had to put a WhatsApp status saying I cannot get Wembley tickets, and luckily, I think the messages stopped coming in there. But just going back to that Liverpool game, when I was walking around the ground, and there were so many fans, Villa fans and Liverpool fans, trying to get tickets, and it was just incredible, really. And there were tickets there were no sort of touts selling them or anything, and I just thought, wow, this club is. It's huge now. There's this broader appeal. There's so many people that want to come and see the games. And as you say, I just think if they can get it right, they can really go places, because it wasn't so long ago, if we remember, 2007, 2008, 2009, where Villa finished sixth back-to-back in 3 seasons on the bounce. They were at the same level as Tottenham at the time. They were getting the same sort of points year on year as Manchester City. I know what happened at Manchester City changed, but there was no difference between Aston Villa and Tottenham Hotspur. And you look at it now, one club's been to a Champions League final, the other club's been back in the Championship for 3 seasons, and there was no difference at one point.
No, that wasn't even that long ago either. I totally agree with you, and I think, I like to play a game in my head called What If I Was a Public Investment Fund, and I didn't, and there was no moral quandary in the game. Which club would I invest in? I've played this game for a long time. Newcastle and Leeds and Villa have always been at the top of the list. The game's obviously more complicated now. But listen, we're going to hear from Alex Stewart for a moment to discuss Aston Villa and some of their tactical aspects on the pitch. But do come back for the second half, where we're going to talk about actual football and football players. Imagine that on a football podcast. Anyway, here's Alex Stewart. Okay, Villa were conceding a lot of goals, and then they tweaked something after the lockdown, didn't they, Alex?
They did tweak something. I mean, the first thing to say is that they managed to reduce their expected goals against by almost half pre and post lockdown. So before lockdown, they were conceding about 2 expected goals per game, and that dropped to 1.04. So that's a massive, massive difference in terms of what they've been able to do. And it's quite interesting if you look at the shot maps, and obviously post-lockdown is a relatively small sample size, but it's very clear from the shot maps that what they were able to do was reduce the number of shots that were occurring inside the box in dangerous areas. This obviously is the easiest way to reduce XG against, because the closer the shot is to the goal, the higher the XG value. So by basically pushing up slightly, having a slightly more proactive defensive line, although I will caveat that in a second, they managed to stop the number of shots that were occurring in and around the penalty area. Interestingly, in terms of sort of ratio-wise, the number of shots coming from outside the area didn't change an enormous amount, but that's fine because they're more chancy efforts because they're further out. So they really did change something in their defensive system.
We made a video about Villa not too long ago, questioning whether or not they could avoid relegation. The feeling at the time was that they couldn't, and whilst the video doesn't say that directly, it does suggest that it would be very, very difficult for them to do so. They have done so. Is it just their moving of the defensive line that is to play for this?
Obviously not entirely, because there are other teams around them, aren't they? So Watford kind of spectacularly imploded by sacking Nigel Pearson, who'd brought them from bottom place into 17th. Bournemouth were quite unlucky, and it only needed one West Ham goal for the relegation thing to have been different. So it's not like Villa achieved a monumental success or anything. But I think what you
pretty exciting on the last day, though. I mean, I would say 24 hours before the final whistle blew, anything could have happened. It looked to me like Villa kind of escaped the grave almost. If you weren't paying attention to fixtures coming up, it looked like that.
Oh, no, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, obviously, excitement, but
your thing.
No, not entirely. But no, look, it was impressive, and I think what's interesting about it is that, so in the video we talked about the need for reducing the space between the midfield and the defence, trying to defend more proactively in terms of pushing forwards, pressing the ball, that kind of stuff. Now, interestingly, Villa didn't press more at all. In fact, pre the lockdown, they were pressing at a higher rate than they were post. There's probably a reason to do with fitness and so on coming in there as well. I think there's, probably teams all generally pressed a bit less. They made fewer blocks as well, but what they didn't do was they didn't slack off on their interceptions. By shifting the defensive line forward and still looking to target passing lanes for interceptions, but otherwise keeping a slightly passive defensive line but further away from the goal, what Villa were able to do was reduce the opportunity that opponents had to get the ball into the box. And
the box into the ball is some feat. I know Villa did something special, but that really seems out of the question.
There's one other interesting little point to make, which is that they reduced the number of errors leading to shots, not significantly, but by enough to even out at sort of 2 errors leading to shots over the course of that small number of games post-lockdown. So 2 errors leading to shots, potentially 2 goals, just by tightening up and concentrating and reducing errors, they potentially prevented 2 goals. So that's pretty important too. I think Tyrone Mings deserves a lot of credit for the way that he has both been an excellent passer of the ball, an excellent builder of moves from the back, but he really kind of led this slightly increased proactivity in the defensive line. And Mings was playing a reasonable amount for England last season, and I think it's possibly unusual for a defender in a side that was flirting with relegation and was defensively quite troubled, to still come out of that looking well with their reputation largely intact. But I think Mings has accomplished that. Matt Targett as well, much more disciplined in the post-lockdown part of the season, fewer forays forwards all of the time, slightly less getting caught out of position. So that left-hand side particularly of Villa's really locked up after lockdown. But yeah, I mean, it was very, very tight, and I still think that with results being slightly different, or West Ham getting a bit of luck in that final game, or what have you, we could be having a very different conversation. But it is noticeable that Dean Smith tried to do certain things with the defence, and they do appear to have worked.
With that sort of team union then that we all witnessed towards the end of the season, what would your expectation be for Villa going into next season now? I mean, they've survived the drop in their first year. That feels like a big accomplishment. That gives a team and a club a lot more confidence. And worth pointing out that we record these inserts before we record the rest of the podcast. So I haven't spoken to Gregg about this yet, but I assume that the idea of Jack Grealish leaving is now not as likely a possibility as it was when Villa looked like they were going to be relegated. So let's just say hypothetically Grealish sticks around and there's maybe money to spend in the transfer window. What would your expectations for Villa be next year?
I think it's difficult to see them being much different from where they are roughly now. I think obviously holding on to Grealish is key. They missed John McGinn and his ball carrying and creativity during the significant portion of the season that he was injured. So I think they were unlucky in some regards with that. Without question, they need a goal scorer. Because Wesley was brought in for a reasonable amount of money and hasn't really performed. I think he's cropped up with a couple of goals that were good in games, that he scored the winning goal or the decisive goal in a particular game, but there's not been sufficient consistency there. Obviously, they need to hold on to Mings as well. And I think they probably want to sort out the goalkeeping situation. I mean, Nyland doesn't really inspire confidence. Reina is, getting on a little bit and did look better, but I think they've got a few areas where they need to upgrade. I don't think that they're going to be able to upgrade sufficiently to kind of catapult them up the table or have expectations that are markedly different from what they had this season. But I also think that a realistic way of progressing into the Premier League in a way that guarantees safety is you do look to sort of, incrementally push up. Obviously, you've got an eye on the teams that are coming up as well and thinking, well, we just have to be better than them and maybe one or two others. So some additions, holding on to Grealish, holding on to McGinn and ensuring his fitness. And Villa could be looking to push up to something like 15th, maybe even 14th. But I think they're still going to be in and around this area next season.
Hey Seb, did you know that Harry's sponsors the Tifo Football podcast?
I do now.
And Alex, did you know that as a listener of ours, you can start shaving with Harry's today by claiming your trial set for £3.95?
I have a beard, though.
Yeah. Support our podcast and get your set delivered to you, including a razor handle, 5-blade cartridge, foaming shave gel, and a travel blade cover, simply by going to harrys.com/Tifo right now. That's harrys.com/Tifo. Okay, there was Alex Stewart. Great guy. Lots of fun. Let's start again, Gregg, with goalkeepers, because on the 1874 the Aston Villa Athletic Football podcast, you talked about the goalkeeping situation at the club. Tom Heaton obviously won't return from injury in time for the new season. Pepe Reina was only at Villa Park on loan, and Oyen Nyland probably isn't quite good enough. Are Villa taking action on this, or is the plan just to wait until Heaton recovers?
Yeah, goalkeepers in Aston Villa.
Yeah.
I felt like I've spoken about and written about this topic so many times this season. I mean, I think they had 5 goalkeepers at one point. It's crazy. But okay, so let's go back to the start. So Villa's recruitment drive last season, going into 2019-20 was, they were trying to get players under the age of 26 who had the potential to increase in value and also stick around at the club for a long time. The one exception to that was Tom Heaton. They felt that Heaton, with his Premier League experience, with his international experience as well slightly, and just his type of a character, he's an exceptional leader and somebody who really galvanises the group. They felt that if they could get him in on board, then he could be the one that sort of pulled all these relatively young players together. I thought he started the season really well. We got to New Year's Day and then he ruptured his cruciate ligament and will not feature again now until probably September or October. So Villa are in the situation where they not only lost their number one goalkeeper and their real big leader, they're also going into next season probably in the same boat. So Pepe Reina came in. I thought he struggled initially, lost his place, then got back into the team and did quite well towards the end. Wouldn't rule out completely him not coming back. There's still a possibility, although very unlikely at this stage. But Villa still might turn to him and maybe offer him something for next season. So if that then leaves Jed Steer, Oyen Nyland and Lovre Kalinic. Jed Steer also was the playoff hero in 2019. It's been a real strange situation for Jed Steer, really, because he's actually the longest serving player at the club now, and he's hardly had his opportunity yet. When he was called upon in the promotion winning campaign, he was fantastic, and without him, Villa wouldn't have got promoted. So on the face of it, I think if you could get Tom Heaton fit and Jed Steer back, that's safe for me. That's a solid goalkeeper first choice with a good backup. And then I think the best idea then for a third goalkeeper is to have somebody relatively young and just try and get him progressing up towards first team level. But you've also got the worries thinking, well, this season Villa had two goalkeepers who were injured, one who lost form, one who dipped in and out of form. So maybe you do need three senior goalkeepers, which would make me think that Villa might have to actually go and buy another goalkeeper, because I don't think and I'm thinking, how am I going to write this? How am I going to justify that Villa need another
just get Brad Friedel back. Just get Friedel back in there and the problem will solve itself. Really. He can still, I'm sure he can still play.
Can I say as well at this point that I will always, whatever Jed Steer does with his career and however he's remembered when he finishes, I will always remember him for his time at Norwich when the three senior goalkeepers were Rudd, Ruddy and Steer. I really I did enjoy that there were all sort of little takes on boating references there. But Seb, do you want to move us on to Jack Grealish, everyone's favourite football player?
Hesitantly so, because I'm sure Gregg's going to get bored of this question. What is happening with Grealish, Gregg? Because I can make a case for him staying. I mean, I remember writing an article a few days ago, and I had 2018 in mind when New Goins just came in, saw him as being far too important to the club's future, and just said, well, he's not for sale. And can you really argue with £7.5 billion worth of ownership money? Is that realistic, or is it just is he already on his way out? Is it kind of a foregone conclusion now?
Do you know what? Like, the landscape has changed quite a lot over the last couple of years. It's he was very close to joining Tottenham, and then the club decided that he was not going to go. The owner said, "You're our best player." Christian Purslow describes him as the heart, the soul and the face of the club. We're not selling you. I think this season will be a little bit different. I think that if, and it's a big if, a club come in with the right money, then Villa will let him go. I think let's see if things change in the weeks ahead. But I believe that if the right money, if they get the right money for him, then they'll let him go, just purely because of where we're at now. And I think that he actually would like to move on. I think that he feels that he wants to go and win trophies somewhere, and he wants to test himself at an elite club. And I personally believe that he's at the level where he can go and do that. I wouldn't rule out the abroad option still, possibly in Spain. He would certainly wouldn't turn that down if it came, but we just got to wait and see. If the issue I think with some of the English clubs at the moment is they're not prepared to pay the money for him. The money that Villa are asking, and that's quite high. I believe to be around about 70, 80 million, and it's a lot of money, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, firstly, obviously, yeah, 70, 80 million is a lot of money, but who do you reckon actually, what's a reasonable landing spot for him if he were to leave? I mean, because Manchester United have been the club associated with him for the longest time, but I think that seemed to be based on the presumption that Villa were going to get relegated and potentially forced into selling him on the cheap. So where can you actually see him going?
Yeah, I mean, Manchester United looked like the right fit previously, but then there were the Paul Pogba issues, and it's like, it feels like he's now very much back in favour and obviously a big part of that team. I still wouldn't rule out United. I just think that they're a club moving in the right places, and if they really, have serious ambitions of kicking on, they do still need to strengthen their squad in various areas. Can't see how Jack Grealish would get into that Man United team straight away because of how they performed. I think he could possibly fit into a Chelsea or Arsenal team. I think there are places there. I could certainly see him going and doing it on the continent. What I don't see is him moving to an Everton, a Newcastle, a Leicester, one of those sides. I just think that that would be seen as, although they are more established Premier League clubs than Aston Villa, I think it would genuinely be seen as a sideways move. I couldn't see him sort of rocking the boat doing that for that. But
it doesn't seem worth it, does it?
No, exactly. I mean, with the affinity and the love he has for the club, it wouldn't feel right. I think there would be a bit of a backlash, to be honest, from supporters if he went to one of those clubs. But I think that the majority of Villa fans recognise incredible effort and enthusiasm he's shown during his time at the club, and they'll almost reluctantly let him, go, providing it's to the right club. But if it's Man United again, Villa fans are going to get so frustrated because if you remember all, back in the days of Dwight York, and Mark Bosnich and then Ashley Young, just feels like Man United are always there to poach the best players. But
do you remember that John Gregory press conference? It was probably about a day after York had they'd agreed to a fee with United for York, and he sat down in front of the press and said that, when Dwight told me if I'd have had a gun, I'd have shot him. Can you imagine if someone said that now?
I know.
It's a very different
Whatever
world.
happened to John Gregory?
Yeah, he's managing in India, I think. Yeah,
he is. Yeah. We had someone interview him for the old Tifo website a really long time ago,
brilliant.
But he seems to be thriving in India. Completely different topic. Let's talk about Douglas Luiz because maybe Villa fans might disagree. I think he's been absolutely brilliant since the restart. He's one of the main reasons why the club is still in the league. Am I right in thinking that Man City have a buyback clause as part of the original transfer agreement?
Yeah, that was inserted into the deal that allowed Villa to buy him from Man City. I think it's 2 years. I think they got active, and I don't know any additional details on that. But what I would say right now is he probably needs a little bit more of a longer period to prove that he can be at that elite level and play for Manchester City. But also at the same time, I'd be thinking, if I was Man City now and I know they've got that clause in there, and looking on his last 10 performances, which by the way were insane, for a player to maintain those levels for 10 games in a row when the games came around literally every 3 or 4 days or whatever it was, I think he's incredible. He's such a just shows how fit he is. I know he's only 22, so he's admittedly needs to be, but understandably, but he was brilliant. So yeah, it's a little bit of a worry for Villa. It's a hot topic, a big talking point amongst supporters at the moment because they feel that like for the first 28 games of the season he did nothing, and now he's had 10 brilliant games, and he might leave now. So it's a worry.
I'm going to move us on to talk about Dean Smith, and I'm going to read a line from one of your recent pieces, Greg Evans. One of the criticisms of Smith, however, is that he wasn't tough enough on his players when they were underperforming. He's not a manager to rant or rave. So what we'd like to know is, does that criticism still exist on the basis that his approach has now been validated by Villa's recovery and the avoidance of relegation? Because after all, doesn't that speak to the healthy morale of the players? Is that how you'd look at it?
Yeah, definitely. Can I just answer your question second? Because it's just the way you asked me that question, Joe. I thought,
Sure.
Sounds like I've done something really wrong here. It sounds like one of those times when a manager or a CEO calls me up and the first thing he says, right, Greg Evans, I'm going to read a line from one of your recent stories.
What do you think about that, Greg? Do you regret it now, Greg?
Oh,
No, to be clear, you are saying that one of the
question.
criticisms that exists, isn't it? It's rather than it being your criticism, it's a criticism that does exist out there. And I just wondered what you think about it now.
I think one of the reasons that Dean Smith deserves a lot of credit is because he showed that he can adapt in times of adversity. And one of the criticisms was, that he wasn't harsh enough on his players when they weren't performing, and he changed. He certainly changed during the lockdown. He made sure that all the players knew exactly what they were doing, but he also got into them a little bit more. And towards the end of the season, there was it was the last game of the season actually, the 1-1 draw with West Ham. Some of the players sort of explained how there was a real dressing down in the dressing room at half time, that he really got into them and sort of just hammered home some home truths and said that basically your Premier League careers are on the line here if you don't pull your finger out and get this job done. And then I noticed sort of his sideline antics as well. There were times where players weren't doing exactly what they were asked to do, and he would really get into them, and that's not something that he'd done previously. So he certainly has changed. And look, in the end, you've got to give him credit, because it was him that changed the style, that made the team more defensive, and that was the only way that Villa were going to survive.
I was going to ask about that actually, because there had been some criticism of his defensive tactics, and also presumably he has to, own at least a bit of the responsibility for some of those disappointing signings. Like with that in mind, what would you say? Obviously, he's not going to lose his job now, but what does his job security look like going into next season?
Yeah, I think Villa want him as their boss next season. He's job safe for now. The players like him. I was told by some of the senior players that when there were rumours of him potentially losing his job, that they were very unhappy at that. Because they thought that they were creating this siege mentality and that they were all pulling together. And then when they read reports which were false by the way, that he was going to lose his job or potentially losing his job, it created a bit of unrest and uneasiness amongst the group. But yeah, look, for a large part of this season, it's felt like Villa have struggled and underperformed. So, of course, in times of success, then you praise the whole team. That's what I do. I praise the whole group. Every member has played a part in it. But also in times of struggle, you all have to shoulder a proportion of the blame. And there were players that Dean Smith wanted. There were players that Suso wanted. Some of them they agreed on. Some of them they went and watched together. Others pushed them more from their own points of view. I just think you can't select individuals. You've got to say that it's a team effort, and when they succeed, praise the team. When they don't, get into them at various different times. But for now, Dean Smith's the man to take Villa forward, and I really personally hope he does, because he's somebody I've known for a long time. He's somebody I know at Warsaw when he was coming through as a manager, and really interesting, really, because a fellow journalist in the press box at West Ham said to me, Dean Smith's probably the most normal manager in the Premier League, isn't it? Out of a group of sort of big characters and a couple of weirdos and here and there, but Dean Smith is just trying to be nice to him. Dean Smith is just very normal. He's a very down to earth family man who just happened to be a good footballer and now a good football manager. So I hope he succeeds.
Greg, I was just going to ask a personal question to end, just about the last day at West Ham. Because obviously, there's that invisible line in the press box between professionalism and being a fan, and having the vested interests of the team at heart. How did you find that as kind of the information was coming in, and you found out the Bournemouth were leading at Everton? What was that like? Yeah,
nerve-wracking. It was a roller coaster of emotions, really, because it was after 6 minutes, I heard somebody shout from behind me, "Yes, fucking Arsenal are winning 1-0," and I thought, oh, great.
That's a pretty good East End accent. That's not bad.
Well, that's a good start. That's Arsenal ahead, and I actually tweeted something else saying, "Oh, it's a good job that Watford are still shit, isn't it?" But after that, Bournemouth took the lead, and he started to become a bit worried, and there was a chance that Michail Antonio had, and he looked certain to score for West Ham. He put it wide, and I just thought, wow, we're 15 minutes into this game. If ever the nerves weren't there, they're massively heightened now. But I have to admit, during in the second half, I just felt that Villa were in control and that they would always see it through. The fact that it was always in their own hands going into the last game sort of gave me a bit of confidence, and yeah, it was a relief at the end more than anything.
Yeah. Well, hey, listen, it was a crazy season for you. We hope you enjoy any summer holidays that you will get before the start of the next year, and we'd love to have you back again next season, Gregg. Thanks for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'll be back next season. No problem.
Fantastic. And Seb, thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe.
We'll be... Oh, you are joking. It's the bell again.
There
Can
it
you hear
is.
the bell?
There's the
This is
bank
gonna, it's
alarm.
going to start sounding like we're doing this on purpose.
timing.
We're really not.
Yeah.
This is
Every
this is the
single
bell.
week this happens.
Anyway, that's just wait for that to stop there, and it's stopped. So thanks so much to all of you for listening, downloading, and liking, subscribing, whatever it is that you've done. Good work, and we'll be back next week. Thanks. Goodbye.